Hello, I'm Malcolm, and thanks for tuning in to the second step of the second tutorial here at School of HDR. Today we're going to be working with these 6 exposures of this shot of the Nashville skyline. We're going to be working in Lightroom, making a few minor adjustments and prepping the files for Photomatics. Hopefully you tuned into the first video, which showed me taking these 6 exposures in the field and went through all the settings that I used to get these 6 photos. All we're going to do now is kind of convert these files to TIFF files and send them over to Photomatics. I'm going to use Lightroom to do that. If you don't have Lightroom, that's okay. You can use Adobe's Camera Raw, or you can use whatever may have come with your camera even. We're only going to do a few minor adjustments that pretty much all these RAW converters are capable of doing. I do recommend Lightroom. It does a really good job at converting the RAW files. You've got a lot of options over here that you can start to use eventually once you learn what all Lightroom can do. It is a pretty powerful program. We're not going to do that much with it today. Really, we're just going to do a few minor adjustments and convert them to TIFF. And the good thing about Lightroom is you can also just automatically import these into Photomatics. You don't have to save the TIFF files somewhere. So the first thing we're going to want to do, we pull up, you can see that we've got these 6 photos here. And these are all the same photo, just different exposures. Everything from -3 to +2 exposure values. One step apart. So you can see here this one is really dark throughout, but the sky is pretty good. And it gets a little better when you come out here. Sky looks really good there, but again, the buildings and the reflections are just too dark. So as we move over, you see we end up getting a lot more detail in these buildings and in the water and the reflections, but we lose a lot of detail in the sky. So the goal here is to merge all of these and come up with one photo that has a much broader dynamic range than any one of these single photos. So we're going to do that by making a few minor adjustments here. Usually I only work right in here. Sometimes we'll come down to sharpening or noise reduction, but most of what we want to do is set the white balance so that it's the same between all 6 exposures. When you bracket 3 and 3 as we did, like you saw me do in the first video, it's possible that the camera, I've got it set to auto white balance, so it's possible the camera can choose a different white balance for you in between that set. So we do want to sync that and make sure those are all the same. And we want to go ahead and just make a few minor adjustments to these highlights and shadows, and that's all I really do in Lightroom. So you can see excuse me, you can see we can pull this down, and you see what it does to the sky and how it gives you more detail in that sky. As this will increase your highlights detail if you slide it to the left here. And we can do the same for the shadows, except we're going to go the opposite way, and you can see by sliding it out to the right, it's going to increase the detail in the shadows. Basically, it just lightens up those portions. So if we do something like that, which gives us a little, it's also a little flatter, but that's okay. We want it to go into Photomatics kind of flat. We want it to come out of Photomatics kind of flat, because we're going to do all of our contrast adjustments in Photoshop using curves layers, and that's where we're going to get our contrast. That's where we're going to get our color. So right now it's okay to leave it just a little bit flat. Trying to check your white balance here. Just make a few minor adjustments too. And you can see you can go crazy if you want to. You can get all kind of different stuff, but let's kind of keep it close to where it was. Kind of like that. Right. You can also do your contrast now, but again, if you might even reduce it a little bit, and that way you've got more to work with as far as your range. When you increase the contrast, you see what it does here to the shadows and to the highlights. So when you put that into Photomatics, it's still going to do, it's just, the detail's not going to be there. So if we bring this down, you can see you get a lot more detail. So when we merge these together, it's going to come out looking pretty good. You can increase the vibrancy. Don't go crazy there either. Again, we can mess with the color when we do our curves adjustments in Photoshop. So I will come down, do just a little bit of sharpening. You don't want to sharpen too much either right now, because it's going to sharpen the whole image. You can end up with a lot of noise in the sky, and Photomatics will only make that noise worse. It'll just get a lot of artifacts and such as it tries to bring out detail where there is no detail. So don't go overboard on the sharpening yet. We can selectively sharpen in Photoshop later. I will do the noise reduction a little bit, and this will help in Photoshop or in Photomatics. You can see as we zoom in right now, it's already made a pretty good difference there. So that's going to be better coming out of Photomatics. And that's really all the minor adjustments I'm going to make here in Lightroom. Now what we got to do is we have to sync. We're going to go ahead and select all of these. We're going to hit the sync button here and make sure that we have the same exact adjustments throughout all 6 exposures. Let's go ahead and make sure every box is checked and hit synchronize. And now you can see that each one of these has this little indication here that shows that we have made developments to these exposures. So now that we've got that already, all you want to do, if you're not in Lightroom, go ahead and just save them as TIFF files and open them up in Photomatics. If you're in Lightroom, you can right click, say export to Photomatics, and this will actually pop up the first box for Photomatics. So I'm going to go ahead and just click Align Images. These were all shot on a tripod, so that's really not that important. All the images do align. Reduce ghosting artifacts. Again, we've got nothing really moving, so that's not going to do much either. I do usually keep the reduce noise and reduce chromatic aberration boxes checked though, and that will help you on the final outcome. And that's it. You hit export. Now you can see up here, Photomatics or Lightroom is saving the files as TIFF and exporting them to Photomatics. So the next step, step 3 in the video, which will be up in a few days, we will go into Photomatics and I'll go through all the settings that I will do with this file in Photomatics. Again, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Go ahead and leave me a comment or send me a message if you have any questions. I'll be sure to answer all that I can. Thanks.